I request all of you to settle down. Thank you very much for curtailing all the material things outside and coming back into a life of the mind. I just, while acknowledging our partners, I'd love to grab your attention because, as I always say, it is our partners that make this possible for us. So before we get into the next riveting session with William Dalrymple, I'd like to thank again, most fervently, Shiv Nadar Foundation, the wonderful, absolutely visionary arm of Shiv Nadar's personal wealth that he has set up to create transformative opportunities, to believe in the power of ideas, and to cross the socio-economic divide, make opportunities possible not just for those who are born into opportunity, but those who do not have it. They have eminent institutions. I'm so sorry, I'm going to ask for your attention. I really don't want to thank our partners without giving them the respect of our attention, because like I said, none of this is possible without them. And they have universities, colleges, schools here in Chennai, in Gurgaon, in Noida. They have an alumni of more than 1 lakh. They have 2,300 teachers. And through Vidya Gyan Shiksha Initiative and the institutions of eminence, they really are backing that fundamental building block of a society, which is equitable education for all. So a big thank you to them. Next, I'd like to thank Johnny Walker. They're the reason some of our audience is still outside. But, and I'm going to quickly ask for the bar to be shut. But again, as I said, why they're such natural partners is because their vision is about resilience, keep walking, to create communities and societies that are diverse, progressive, and embracing of, of all. So very, very happy to have Johnny Walker as our partner. We have Wumadi Bangaru Jewelers, who have been a household name for 100 years, trusted by 6 generations. I'm wearing a very small item of theirs, which I must show to you. And they have their stall at the back. They make exquisite diamond and gold jewelry, and their craftsmanship really talks of heritage as well as modernity. They have showrooms in Chennai. They have one in Dallas. And, they have a creative center which creates their own unique designs. And as I said, if any of you are fortunate enough to possess their beautiful jewelry, do go inquire about it. I'd next like to thank Lexus. I do hope in the short break that we gave you, many of you have inquired at least for a test drive of the Lexus NX, which is on display over there. They truly believe in an emotional connection with a sort of memorable experience, and that is why they wanted to back us here at Ignition. They believe in this experience that they create, and the car in a way symbolizes that. Exquisite craftsmanship, great metal, and a vision which is of energy transition, sustainability, and a hybrid electric with very, very low emissions. So really a luxury worth possessing. I'd like to thank the Brigade Group that, has very high-end properties across most of South India, in Bengaluru, here in Chennai, in Kochi, in Hyderabad, in Thiruvananthapuram, in Chikmagalur, and they also have one at Gift City in Ahmedabad. They've created more than 280 buildings. They've served 45,000 people. I'm just going to ask for your silence again. I'm really sorry, but I genuinely feel this respect for all our partners, and unless we acknowledge them and reach out to them, these evenings would not be possible. So I do request the courtesy of your attention. Brigade Icon on Mount Road has buildings that are 3, 4, 5 bedrooms strong. They also have high-end retail, office spaces, so very integrated projects. And in the realm of properties, I know as someone who's been singed, the fact that they deliver on time, they have committed to becoming zero emissions by 2045, makes them a very attractive prospect, and I hope some of you are their clients. I'd also like to thank 23 Varna Drive. that has a beautiful community, very exclusive, which is on the East Coast Road with views of the Odir Lake and the Bay of Bengal and the sound of water on the beach. And yet it is very close to the city. It's near the Sarnabhumi Integrated Township, near schools and hospitals. And they truly have a vision that aligns with nature, because 80% of their project is dedicated to natural forests and nature. They've created regenerative forests, from farm to plate, food systems that are completely natural, flood-resilient structures, water harvesting and solar. So they're really committed to creating luxury, again, with an eye to the ESG goals. And it's not just about having a home, but that it's also a very valuable investment. So do reach out to to their representatives over here. And a big thank you to 23 Varna Drive. Thank you to Hema and the Brand Avatar team. To Hemu Ramaya, another huge clap for her. And of course, to the wonderful team at Lucid Lines and to my partner, Aditya Puri. And now to get into the grand finale of this evening, which takes us back many thousand years, and yet the themes are somewhat similar. William Dalrymple has already become a household name with all his fantastic array of books of history. He's worked on the East India Company, on the Mughal era, but now his book, The Golden Road, addresses a question that in some ways we've been speaking of the entire evening, which is what is the civilizational history and heritage of India? And his book talks about a golden 1500-year period when ancient India shaped not only the Western world, but the Eastern world, and was the fulcrum of mathematical, scientific, cultural, religious, and trade across the world. And it was an empire of ideas, not brandished through the sword, but just with the power of thought. It's wonderful to have meticulous scholarship that brings back that vision of India and its centrality to world discourse, and it sets up a kind of positive ideal of what India can do again, not just as looking back with memory, but with a sense of rootedness in the past, but with an eye to the future. It's a fascinating book full of riveting characters, riveting scholarship. The book is outside for you to buy. William will be there to sign books after this. But first, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming William Dalrymple on stage. You missed my encomium to you, you know.
First things first, you need a gin and tonic before you face an audience like this.
You know, the Scottish never forget their history and heritage, you know.
We have a reputation to maintain.
Yes, yes. So, Willie, you missed all the glowing things I already said about your book.
I'm very glad to hear I did.
Yeah. But, you know, as I was saying to the audience, that your book is fascinating because it sets up 4 pillars of inquiry. One is the trade aspect. The other is the religious, philosophical ideas that India took to the world through Buddhism and through Hinduism. And the 4th is the entire realm of maths and science and astronomy.
I should employ you as my publicist, Shoma. I should just retire from giving lectures and just let you do it. It's much better.
So I want to start with, and you overturn many sort of received certitudes, Willie. So first I want to start with the trade aspect of India, which most people don't think of India as a kind of great trade partner with the world. What did your research show you about India and Rome?
Could we go to the slides? That would be very good. Let's take off the picture of Shoma and I, beautiful as we both are. And if we could have the slide presentation. Here we go. So I think the reason that we don't think about India as a major center of trade is this map up here. We've been taught over the last 40 years to think of the Silk Road as the principal passage between East and West. And this map, taken at random from one of the many recent books on the Silk Road, presents this very romantic picture of the trade routes between the Mediterranean and the South China Sea, across the thin waste of Asia, through Iran, over the Pamirs, the Gobi Desert, the Taklamakan. And this version, even the maritime route, which you can see coming down the south, the thin dotted line going through the Malacca Straits, bypassing India, because as you can see on this map, India has no cities, India has no ports, India has only the Himalayas, according to this version of events. And unlike Central Asia, which is riddled with oasis ports full of prosperity, India is a place of no consequence. So one of the founding ideas behind this book is that this map is basically bullshit. And if you look at this map, you get a much better idea of trade at this time. This is a map of the coin hoards found since the 19th century. As you can see, Roman coins, as you'd imagine, all over France, Italy, Spain, Britain, around the Mediterranean, down through the Nile. A small scattering of coin hoards in Yemen and Central Asia. Not one single Roman coin ever found in China, because Rome and China had no idea of each other's existence. However, India was the Roman Empire's #1 trading partner. And that is instantly recognizable by the bright orange of all the Roman coins found, especially on this coast at Arikamedu, just south of here, all the way through, but also Maziris in Kerala. And if you look behind you, Shoma, you can see the extraordinary map of yellow, and orange, which is the sign of how far we've been misled. Because the Silk Road in the classical period is basically a complete myth. It's an idea that has not one classical reference, no Chinese source, no Roman source talks about the Silk Road, because Rome and China did not know of each other's existence. But India was the #1 trading partner. And India, you have references in Pliny, who's a Roman naval commander, AD 79, he's killed in Pompeii, so he's living in the kind of AD 50, just immediately after the death of Jesus in Jerusalem. Pliny is a naval commander, and he says that India is the drain of all the precious metals in the world. That all the gold in Rome is sinking into the pockets of your ancestors, because you overcharged my ancestors very badly for pepper and ivory. And I can just show quickly, Shoma, you will enjoy this. This map.
Willie, you're being Scottishly wicked now.
This map of all the trading ports on the west coast of India, and all the way from Maziris to Barbaricum, which is modern Karachi. The Roman Empire is trading with all these different ports. Strabo talks about 250 vessels a year leaving one port in Roman Egypt to come with the monsoon winds across the Indian Oceans. And behind, you can see at the north, Tibet, which creates the monsoon winds. It's freezing over as we speak now. In the spring, warm winds will blow out. And that regular rhythm of cold winds blowing in the winter and warm winds blowing out in the spring creates the bellows that creates the monsoon winds, which means that in 2 months you can leave Maziris or Barbaricum or Barigaza and sail in just 2.5 months to the Red Sea ports of...
So, Willie, I wanted to ask you something here. Willie and I are having a little bit of a tug and pull on this. Willie wants to do a presentation and I want to do a conversation. So we have come to a classic Indian compromise, which is that he'll do a presentation and I'll do a conversation.
And somewhere between the two, we'll get to the truth, Shobha.
Right. So, Billy, it's fascinating that, like you said, you've overturned this idea that it was China and Rome that were trading in the Silk Route. So one is that, is the Silk Route a complete myth, or is it just that the historical setting is incorrect? And number two, again, there was an idea that Indians never crossed the seas. But here you're saying most of the trade was not overland, it was via the oceans, So why did you call it the Golden Road?
So there is two stages to this story. In the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century, it is the west coast of India which is looking towards Rome, this map that we have in front of us now. Every one of those ports is aligned to the Roman trade. And it isn't just Rome, there's also Ethiopia, which we forget about on the way. Ethiopia is a major kingdom in this period. This gorgeous image is in your incredibly badly curated Chennai National Museum, which is a scandalously underfunded and badly displayed book of the most wonderful masterpieces that should be massively invested in and celebrated. The Chola Bronze Room alone should be one of the great museum pieces of the world, but we will leave that for another time. But this beautiful image is sitting there in your Chennai National Museum without any flagging, and it shows an Ethiopian embassy arriving in Arikamedu or in Amaravati in about 200 AD. And there is this whole world of international trade which has been ignored, which is unknown to the general public. And when Rome falls, there is a major economic crisis in this part of the world. Suddenly, it's like, imagine Saudi Arabia if everyone went over to electric cars tomorrow. Suddenly, the Saudis would have to get out of bed in the morning and have to do some work rather than just relying on money pouring into their bank accounts. And your ancestors, ripping off my ancestors with their pepper and their ivory, and were able more or less to be the Saudis of the 1st century AD. They were able just to make huge sums of money, giving these unbelievably expensive luxuries to Rome, and the Romans would come all the way, they'd buy them. But then in the 5th century, Rome falls. And there's a major economic crisis, and the force which solves the problem are the Tamil trading guilds. And I'm just going to wind forward to another map somewhere at the end here. And the Tamil trading guilds are badass. Here we go, these guys. The Tamil trading guilds have military mercenaries attached to them. They own all the ships. They have a corps of assassins who track down anyone that messes with their merchants. And when Rome falls and no money is coming from the west, they pivot eastwards. Yeah. And this is the period in which they look for gold in the area which comes to be known as Savarnabhumi, the lands of gold. Today, the airport in Thailand is known as Savarnabhumi, but this is a phrase which is born in this coast, and the winds that create it blow the merchants from Mamallapuram, from Nagapattinam, from Arikamedu, through to the new sources of gold, Bujang, Palembang, Keling, Kutai, and also Sarawak, which is Savanadvipa of the Jatakas and of the Ramayana. And these guys establish an entirely new trade looking for gold in Southeast Asia. And the Tamil trading guilds, I would argue, push Rajendra Chola and Rajaraja Chola into the raids of 1016 and 1025 and extend their influence, rather like the East India Company 400 years before the East India Company.
Right. So, Willie, I wanted to, give the audience a matrix of the kind of time frame as well as the geographic frame that you've located the book. So, Willie's book really begins in 250 BC, which is in the Ajanta cave, that there's a discovery there, which was fascinating again, Willie, and then it goes all the way up to 1200 AD, when there's a cataclysmic event, which we'll talk about, which he says really puts a kind of end to this entire
Two
chapter.
cataclysmic events.
Yes.
We don't want to sound like Vikram Sampath.
Yes, we'll come to that. But talk to us about the Ajanta cave, Willie. And, you've already talked about the trade with Rome. One other fact from Willie's book is that 1/3 of Rome's economy was running on Indian trade. That's how much India was contributing to the world economy. But, Willie, you talk about this pivotal moment in the Ajanta cave, and that becomes a window into just how cosmopolitan India was at that very point, and the propulsion of Buddhism in India's trade as well. So talk to us about that.
So we have, I think, this sensation when we think about ancient India, that it's like some hermetically sealed Tupperware full of Indianness. The reality, of course, is very much more like the present. If you want to excel in any science today, you don't immerse yourself in your immediate surroundings. You gather the greatest scholarship from around the world, and you then take it 2 steps forward. So Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta are not sitting in a sort of cave with all the learning of Persia and Egypt and Greece far away. They are bringing in the scholarship, the Yavana Puranas, the invention of zero as a placeholder, which is invented in Babylon, ideas from ancient Egypt. All these ideas are in India. And it's the Gupta period in the 3rd and 4th century. I think when Indian nationalists imagine the greatness of ancient India, they have some dream of this Vedic past where there's helicopters in the Mahabharata, atomic weapons at Kurukshetra, the rishis have their own form of the internet. No. You don't need to make any of this stuff up, because what ancient India did is extraordinary, and you need to stick to the facts to understand it. And what happens is that in the Gupta era, you have a period when all the world's learning is here. When you look at the Ajanta caves, just the other side of the cave from this fabulous image of Padmapani, you have images of Scythians, Parthians, Greeks, Romans, Ethiopians, Egyptians, all coming to India because India is rich and because India is learned and full of ideas. It's a fascinating place to be, and it's a place that pulls people in, like New York does, or London does today,
right,
or Shanghai does.
But you're talking about the Gupta period, but this was in 250 BC, right? That there was already this level of trade and cosmopolitanism.
No, I think it's something that develops more in the early centuries AD. What you get in 250 BC is Ashoka. And what Ashoka does is he's the first person to begin to consciously export Indian culture. In your school books, it's often written, if you think of, can we have the slides back? Yeah. So when you have Ashoka presented in textbooks, it's the Lion capital, it's Sarnath. But what is most interesting about Ashoka is this map. He sends out missionaries from India, what he calls Dharma ministers, as far as Cyrene, which is modern Libya, as far as Sri Lanka. And this isn't myth, this is fact. So as recently as 2 years ago, the stupa of Ashoka's son Mahinda was discovered by archaeologists in Sri Lanka on the hill of Rajagala in central Sri Lanka. And all this material is developing fast. This is a fast-moving archaeological detective story where new data is turning up every year. And Ashoka sends out missionaries to Cyrene, to Sri Lanka. The king of Anuradhapura converts to Buddhism. And with Buddhism comes not just the ideas of the Buddha, but a whole range of Indic ideas about karma, about time, about yugas, about Jambudvipa, about geography. And the great miracle is this. Look at this, guys, for a second. This is the story of the greatest moment of Indian soft power export. This is what happens with Buddhism. Just follow the map. Out of the Gangetic Plains, out of Lumbini, you get an arrow going north through Pakistan, Gandhara, Afghanistan to Bactria. Other missionaries are moving through Tibet and Bhutan to Dunhuang and Mongolia, through China to Vietnam, Korea, Japan, down to the Philippines, through Laos, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia. This is if you have one thing that is ancient India's most successful export, it's Buddhism. But Buddhism does not just bring with it the ideas of the Buddha and the ideas of how to combat suffering, which was the Buddha's core idea. It brings with it a whole Indic world. It connects the people that accept Buddhism to Sanskrit and to Pali, and introduces Indic learning massively beyond the borders of this country. So often historians that have thought about ancient India have dealt only with ancient India itself. What's so extraordinary about the period after Ashoka is the arrows on this map. I mean, just look at it. They are extraordinary. There's nothing subsequently in Indian history that compares to this moment of Indian ideas dominating everything, passing not through the power of the sword, not through conquest, not through brute military force, but through the sophistication of the ideas, through the attraction of the ideas. And this changes the face of Asia to this day. China, to this day, contains more Buddhists than anywhere else in the world, but also Laos, China, Cambodia, Japan, Korea, Mongolia, Siberia.
So, Willie, you've shown the sheer spread of this. You know, I wanted to zero in on some geographies, and I'll come back after we're done to that question about the Vedic period. You know, forget how it's represented now, but there's amazing cosmology and, you know, ideas that are brewing there.
But it doesn't leave India in the way that this does.
Yes.
So I'm not saying that it's unsophisticated or that it's not wonderful, but the Vedic ideas remain largely in India, other than those which are carried through the first cousin, which is Zoroastrian texts and so on, which are related to the Vedas.
Right. And we'll come to the latter period of Angkor Wat and all that. But before that, sticking with Buddhism, and we'll come to the maths and science. So Buddhism was really being exported, and then through the Kushans into Afghanistan and then into China. And you have two very exciting characters. I know you're very attached to your presentation, but I'm
I wouldn't want you to think in any way that I'm avoiding our conversation, Shobha.
Yeah, but I would love you to speak about some of the wonderful characters that you've written about in the book. So let's do the Kushans and the Wu Zetian, you know, the Chinese empress, who's the real badass of China, but who really uses Buddhism to leverage power. Tell us all about her. You know.
So, well, there's two characters, really, who are responsible for the most extraordinary moment in Indian soft power history, which is the moment when India conquers China. It's never happened before, it's never happens again, but it happens in the mid-7th century. And it begins with this man on the right here. Is there a pointer?
Xuanzang.
There's no pointer. So this is Xuanzang. Xuanzang with his natty backpack, do you see the scrolls behind him? And the little kind of torch dangling from his backpack in front. Xuanzang is the sort of ultimate academic nerd. He's worried about the corruption of the text that he's reading. And he's aware that in India, there is the fullness of the Buddhist tradition, which is not available in Chinese in China. So he makes this decision in his 20s, illegally, to leave China, to risk his life crossing the Gobi Desert and the Taklamakan and over the Pamirs, through Kashmir to Nalanda. And Nalanda is one of the most extraordinary moments of Indian cultural history. Nalanda is a Buddhist monastery. It's a Mahavihara, but it's also the most profound scholarly center in Asia. After the burning of the Alexandria Library, there's nothing else like it. It has libraries 9 stories tall. In it is taught, according to Xuanzang, the Vedas, logic, grammar, philosophy, medicine, metaphysics, divination, mathematics, Sanskrit, astronomy, literature, and magic. The library was 9 stories tall and contained 3 divisions: the Ratnadadi, the Sea of Jewels, the Ratnasagara, the Ocean of Jewels, and the Ratnarajaka, the jewel adorned. Xuanzang comes here, and it's like he's arrived at Harvard or Oxbridge or the Ivy League. And specifically, look at the plan of Nalanda. What does that remind you of? A courtyard, a cloistered hearth, scholars' rooms on 2 stories. It's the same plan that you see in first Islamic madrasas and then at Oxbridge, in Balliol or Trinity or any of Corpus or any of these places. Yeah. There behind you, Shoma, is the plan of the future university model, which will be operating until this day. The only difference is that in Nalanda it's brick, and in Oxbridge it's a lawn. And what Xuanzang does is he comes here, and for 20 years he copies out the manuscripts. And then he goes back to Tang, China, and the old emperor, Taizong, is on his deathbed. He has just taken on a 15-year-old concubine called Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian looks like a bit of an old boot in this picture, but we probably have more of an idea of what's going on next if we go to the Chinese soap opera, which makes the story a bit more apparent for your imaginations at this stage of the evening. Thank you for staying up for this late presentation. And so Wu Zetian, as you can see, is a piece of work.
I have so much to cover. I wanted to tell all about her.
You want to hear about Wu Zetian or not?
Yes. Will you please tell us all about her exploits super fast, because I want to take you through all this geography and back in time, you know? So
Wu Zetian.
Yes.
We'll do Wu Zetian. So Wu Zetian is the 15-year-old concubine of the old grandfather emperor Taizong. He's about 65. She's 15. When he dies, she, along with the other queens and concubines, put out to a nunnery to grasp. But she's only, by this stage, 17. So she's not going to put up with that. So before the old emperor dies, she manages to seduce his son, the crown prince. And so she's brought back after he rises to the throne as the chief concubine.
Yeah. She
gives birth to his son. 6 months later, the son is found strangled. There is a huge scandal. The new crown prince is dead. So an inquiry is mounted, and the finger of evidence points to the empress and the former chief concubine, who are supposed to have been jealous of her. They have their bones broken, and they are drowned in a vat of wine. Yeah. Wu comes to the throne. She then, certainly then, the Gaozong, her husband, has a stroke, mysteriously, and she takes over. This picture on the top left, you can see her seizing power. And then Gaozong dies, also in mysterious circumstances, and Wu Zetian becomes the first and only woman emperor in 3,500 years of Chinese dynastic history. Yeah. Big clap for Wu Zetian. but more importantly, she makes Buddhism the state religion of China. And she does this by bringing about a coup d'etat of Nalanda-trained Indian alumni. It's an Indian coup d'etat, the heart of the Chinese state. And it brings about the high watermark of Indian influence in China. Never again, right up to the present, will India have more influence in China than under this gorgeous woman here. So a big round of applause for Wu Zetian.
So, Willie, I just wanted to, just because we're going to soon start running out of time and there's lots of stories to tell.
We've got all the time in the world to tell.
Yeah.
It's not going nowhere.
Is that, you know, just her intersection with the story about Indian influence. So one was Buddhism, but what I found fascinating in your book also was that she got priests from Varanasi, she got people from Nalanda to legitimize her reign, but also fascinatingly, and that comes back to the idea of India being the sort of crucible of knowledge that people were seeking, that she was sending out emissaries to go to the furthest corners to bring back super precious manuscripts,
Correct.
which were full of knowledge that others were seeking, you know. So talk to us a little bit about the intellectual aspect of China and India's intersection at this point.
So I think we've always been led to believe that India was the recipient of Chinese ideas such as gunpowder, porcelain, paper. And that's true. There are ideas which do come from China to India. But I think we've somehow failed to recognize the elephant in the room, which is the fact that the main religion in China comes from India. And it isn't just a religious idea, it's a whole set of philosophies that bring with it an entire world of Indic learning, ideas of geography, ideas of cosmology, ideas of yupas and yugas and astronomy. The main astronomer in her court is called Gautama Siddhartha. There's a rival Kayas group who are the rival astronomers who are also Indian. So you have enormous opportunities for Indians running the court in China at this period. And what's fascinating is that exactly the moment that Wu Zetian is running this business in China, the same is going on in Southeast Asia. Mid-650s seems to me the period of maximum Indian influence in the world. Not the Vedic period, not the Indus Valley, not all these periods that we've come to sort of dream about, but this extraordinary period at the very end of the Gupta period is maximum Indian influence across Asia, in Southeast Asia, in Buddhism, but also in Hinduism. And you have all these Indian merchants leaving this coast and the Pallavas from this immediate area, in Mamallapuram, in Kanchipuram. These are the guys that are leading this extraordinary period. You're finding Buddhist ideas from here taking root in Thailand. You're finding Buddhism and the very first lingams and yonis and images of Shiva appearing in Malaysia by the mid-5th century, but particularly in the Mekong Delta between Vietnam and Cambodia. You have down these extraordinary canals that cross the Mekong Delta, the first, at the end of them, on Angkor Bure and Ashram Maharaze, the very first Hindu temples in Southeast Asia. And you have inside those temples these extraordinary images based on the Pallava images sculpted in Mamallapuram and Kanchipuram, just south of here, but taking on their own forms and with big differences from what's going on here. For example, here is Jayavarman II, the founder of the Angkor dynasty, portraying himself as Vishnu, something that would be regarded as deeply blasphemous here. And you've got these local rulers surrounding themselves with Pallava Brahmins from here, and they bring the script of Kanchipuram. This is your ancestors' direct work. Specifically, the Pallava Grantha script developed in Kanchipuram, just to the south of here, is the basis for every single pre-Islamic script in Southeast Asia. Pew, Thai, Mon, Khmer, the whole lot are based on this script. This script is a version of Southern Brahmi designed for palm leaf manuscripts. The northern version is the straight line with the washing line with the letters hanging off it. This is developed for palm leaf, which is what people used around here. And if you use straight lines, it cuts into the palm leaf. So you have to have the curvilinear letters, which you all use in Tamil. They're developed in Kanchipuram, and they spread to every single country in Southeast Asia.
So, Willie, again, just to distill this, I wanted to focus on, say, one character. So, you know, while Buddhism was spreading to China and elsewhere, here Hinduism was also exported. Talk to us about the figure of Vajrabodhi, you know, the tantric man who actually became the architect, or his ideas formed the basis of Angkor Wat, which is the great...
Borobudur.
Of Borobudur, which is one of the big Hindu temples. So talk to
Buddhist.
us... Sorry, Buddhist. But he was a tantric Buddhist, sorry. Yeah. I meant that speak to us about Angkor Wat and its impacts, and then Borobudur also.
So, Vajrabodhi was a Pallava from this area. The Pallavas ruled from Kanchipuram. Their port was Mamallapuram. And Vajrabodhi is from the last generation of the Pallavas who are Buddhist. Mahendra Pallava converts to Shaivism, and the whole subsequent history of Bhakti and so on in this part of the world continues. But Vajrabodhi is a Buddhist. He goes to Nalanda at the age of 12 because he's so brilliant. He comes back, he receives his enlightenment in an iron stupa in Tamil Nadu. We don't know where this is or what exactly this refers to. But so this guy is regarded as the great magician of his time. And I mean, you can interpret it as you like, but his contemporaries describe his ability to create rain, to have what they call as rain dragons. And he's regarded like sort of Merlin in the King Arthur stories as this magician who can send off armies magically to fight battles at a distance, create rain, change the world around him. And he travels, he's summoned by the king of Kanchipuram, who is his cousin, and who's worried about two enemies. One is the Arabs, who've just arrived on the borders of Sindh, and are raiding now into Karnataka. The other are the Tibetans, who we often forget about, who are raiding down through what's now Nepal into what's now Orissa. And his mission is to create an alliance against the Arabs to the west and the Tibetans to the east, with the king with Wu Zetian's son, the emperor of China. So he sets sail first to Sri Lanka, where he gathers more Mahayana Buddhist texts. He lands here in Java, and there's now evidence that this extraordinary building, Borobudur, which is one of the most extraordinary monuments in the world, it's in the shape of a mandala, but it's a step pyramid, 5 stories tall, and it's based on models in Bihar, Kesaria, and in Bangladesh, Sompo Mahavihara. But it's the ultimate, largest, most extraordinary Buddhist monument in the world, and it shows the sort of thing that probably once existed in Kanchipuram, which is no longer there. And Vajrabodhi, sent by the Pallavas as an ambassador, becomes the basis for Mahayana Buddhism in China. And he brings his ideas on the way to Java and is responsible for the building of Borobudur, which is based on a Pallava model. So the dynasty which rules from Kanchipuram changes the face of
Java
Buddhism. But equally...
And the Angkor Wat was then...
So Angkor Wat is a slightly different story, but it's also based on South Indian models. But by this stage, what's interesting is that Southeast Asia, India is still divided into tiny kingdoms. The Pallavas are more powerful than most. The Cholas will be more powerful still. But India remains a fragmented country politically, while by the 9th century, you've got 2 mega-states in Southeast Asia. Srivijaya, which is basically modern Indonesia, with all those islands, and the Khmer Empire, which is Cambodia plus Laos plus Vietnam plus Thailand. And it's in 1120, about a century after the big temple in Tanjore, that you get Angkor Wat. And Angkor Wat is the largest Hindu temple in the world, and don't tell Mr. Modi, the Khmers are the biggest Hindu empire in history. which isn't what the...
So,
But hang on, just so the size of Angkor Wat, even within the moat, is 5 times the size of the Vatican City. There are 1.2 million people living in Greater Angkor in 1120 when this is built, when London is 20,000 people. And this is the greatest high point, in a sense, of Indic civilization in terms of scale of the cities, and it's all in ideas that come from here, and yet it's not entirely familiar. When Tagore goes to Angkor Wat, he gets it exactly right. He says, everywhere I could see India, yet I could not recognize her. Because it's been slightly transformed on the way. So at the center of the central pillar, central tower of Angkor Wat, are the ashes of its king, Suryavarman II. Now, I don't know any temple in India where you have the ashes of the king at the center of the temple. I don't know any sculpture of a Pallava or Chola royal where he's shown as Lord Shiva. You have in Kanchipuram, in the Kailashanatha temple, you have Raja Chola being crowned by Lord Shiva, but you don't have Raja Chola as Lord Shiva. But you do here. So what has happened in Southeast Asia is that these ideas have spun off on their own trajectory.
So, Willie, there are 2 very important things I wanted to speak about now is the science and maths, you know, and that India was exporting the idea of the zero, decimals, fantastic, interesting ideas that became the basis of modern maths in the Western world. But interestingly, its path to the Western world was through the Islamic world, you know, the Abbasids of the Caliph Mansur. And, you know, that entire sort of collection of people there, again, is a fascinating story. And that there were 2 Buddhists who came from Afghanistan, converted, and then they're translating Sanskrit into Arabic, and then that goes on to becoming the basis of European maths. You know, that's a fascinating story, told super fast, because then I want you to tell us what brought an end to all of this.
So, we're going back now to the Guptas. 550, this is Madhya Pradesh, the Gupta dynasty, Chandragupta II. Here we are, in the left we have Varaha rising out of the floodwaters. His foot is on the coils of a Nagasadu and Nagaraja. And just to the far right of the Nagaraja is the gym-buffed figure of Chandragupta II. He's headless, but this is the guy that builds this extraordinary astronomical observatory at Udaygiri. There are sight lines, there are observatories, there are water clocks, and it's the greatest surviving ancient Indian observatory. The unrusting metal pillar in the Qutub Minar in Delhi, where we live, is from Udaygiri originally.
Yeah.
And this is the period that you get Aryabhatta coming up with the exact circumference of the Earth, the distance between the Earth and the Sun, the fact that the Earth spins on its own axis. And what you then see over the next 1,000 years is like a relay race from him sitting in Pataliputra in 500 AD. The first stage of the relay race is to Brahmagupta, who's sitting on Mount Abu in Rajasthan, of all places. And he meditates on the concept of zero, of sunya, the absence, the void. And he defines it. He comes up with rules for zero. Zero is the number that you get when you take a number from itself. And 30 other rules like that. And by defining zero, he gives it its power. He creates zero as a number rather than an absence or a placeholder. And this image here, the dot in the second line in the center between the 2 tadpoles, that is the first dated zero in the world. Here it is again in its first recognizable form as R0. 270? This is in Gwalior, 9th century. Disappointingly, it's a rather boring inscription. It's about the number of marigolds that someone has to give to the temple, 270 marigolds. But this gives birth to this map, which we should all be taught in school, but none of us are. Our numbers begin with Brahmi in the 1st century. They pass through the Gwalior inscription about the marigolds, and then it goes into 3 different directions. Sanskrit and Devanagari, the East Arabic numbers, which is what's used in Iraq and Saudi Arabia to this day, and then the West Arabic numbers, which are developed in Morocco and Spain, and which by the 16th century have become the numbers that are on the phones and the laptops of every one of you here. It is the nearest thing that the human race has ever created towards a universal language. It's used by the whole world, and it was developed here. And no one outside India knows this, because we call them Arabic numbers in the West. But they were invented here, and they are India's greatest gift to the world.
You know, that passage, if you're going to take it long to tell it, we'll have to cut it out.
I will tell it very quickly,
Yes,
Shobha,
do tell it, because I think it's a fascinating story, that this wonderful conception. And one more thing, Willie, which you haven't shared with the audience, is that so much of these mathematical concepts were written in Sanskrit poetry or in Sanskrit meter. So it's not only amazing concepts, but then written in Sanskrit meter so that it's easy to memorize. And then you have Arabic scholars that also know Sanskrit that are communicating this or translating it to be passed on to the Italians. You know,
so here is the story. So those of you that have grandchildren that you probably sat them in front and looked at the Disney Aladdin can remember Jafar, the guy with the parrot? Okay, so he, bizarrely, improbably, is the guy behind this next jump. The relay race has passed from Pataliputra to Mount Abu. It then moves from Mount Abu through Sindh to Baghdad. The Barma kids are a family of Sanskrit literate Buddhist abbots who convert to Islam in the 650s, the same time as Wu Zetian is in
China,
Xi'an, the same time that the first Hindu sculptures are being and first Hindu temples are being built in the Mekong Delta. Exactly that moment, the 660s, these guys come to power in Baghdad. They are the viziers of the Abbasid caliphs. And the first thing they do is to send to, let's get this map, they send from Sindh to Baghdad for the book that the Arabs call the Great Sindh Hind, which is the collected works of Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta together. The Arabs, under the Barmakids, try and translate it, but it's not until, do you see up at the top of the map, there's a place, Khorazm, beneath the Aral Sea? Yeah. A young boy comes from Khorazm to Baghdad, and he has the mathematical and the linguistic abilities to render these complex Sanskrit texts into simple, comprehensible Arabic prose. His name is Al-Khwarizmi, and because he's from Khwarizm. And the book he writes is called The Compendious Book of Calculation by Completion and Balancing by Hindu Calculation. Now that's obviously not the making of a bestseller. So people know it by the nickname of Al-Jabr, which is the basis of our word algebra. His name, Al-Khwarizmi, is the basis of our word algorithm. And these ideas together spread throughout the Arabic world. Now back to this map. So they spread from Baghdad through Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria to Spain. And they reach Islamic Spain by the 10th century. And by the late 10th century, the first Christian monks are coming down to Barcelona to study the Indian mathematical system. But it remains, bizarrely, the product only of a small group of scholars for another 300 years. And then, look at the map of Italy. You see Pisa up at the top. Pisa founds a merchant colony in Algeria on the North African coast. And the notary who founds it brings his son. The son goes to the local school, he learns Arabic, but he also learns the works of Al-Khwarizmi, which is now available for every teenager across the Islamic world. Luckily for us, that teenager is Fibonacci. And Fibonacci goes back to Italy, and he writes this book, the Liber Abaci. Because in Italy, they're still using MCXV1 times XVXVVV to do their long multiplication. And the Liber Abaci tells the Italians that you don't need to do this shit. You can just use what he calls the 9 Indian numerals and 0, with which you can express any number up to infinity.
Wonderful.
So, just nearly there. So he writes this book, and it comes to the attention of Frederick II, who is the emperor. And he is an intellectual, another lucky stroke for the West, because otherwise we'd still be doing long multiplication with MCVVXV1. And he comes to Pisa all the way to see this young kid. And they have a sort of countdown-style open-air mathematical contest. And Fibonacci, being Fibonacci, wipes the floor with all the other guys. And then Fibonacci is called to this beautiful, geometrically perfect castle, Castel del Monte in Puglia, where I'm very glad to say, in another improbable twist, he meets a Scotsman. And the Scotsman is a guy called Michael Scott. And Michael Scott says, look, pal, this is all very well, but it's a wee bit theoretical. And he makes Fibonacci produce a second edition, which has money lending, currency conversion, double accounting, interest rates, and this produces the banking revolution of the Medici. Fibonacci's account later gets to the hands of the Renaissance painters like Piero della Francesca, who writes 3 mathematical treatises about perspective and how you can work out perspective using the mathematics of Fibonacci, which are the mathematics about Brahmagupta, which are the mathematics of Aryabhatta. And then Piero della Francesco's 3 mathematical texts are taken up to Milan by Piero della Francesca's flatmate, who then has as his flatmate another penniless painter who's painting in Milan a picture of the Last Supper, and that man is Leonardo da Vinci. So it's a relay race. It starts off in Pataliputra with Aryabhatta, it spreads to Brahmagupta in Mount Abu, the Sindhis take it to Baghdad, the Baghdadis take it across the Islamic world, Fibonacci takes it to Europe, and eventually Leonardo da Vinci perfects it in the Renaissance. Voila.
Wonderful. On that note, Willie,
and
we are going to...
one last thing, and
I'm
finally, the East
question.
India Company.
Yeah, leave the East India Company, we know all about them. But I wanted to ask you, Willie, you again break a certain... This is a thing that one did not understand. So for 1,500 years, there's been this empire of ideas without a sword, diffusion through the most wonderful means, and then it does come to an abrupt halt. One, as we know, is the invasion of the, it's of the central steppe, Muslim invaders that come in. But you say that there's actually another cataclysmic event that happens, which puts a kind of iron wall on India, which we haven't really taken cognizance of, so share that with the audience.
So again, every WhatsApp uncle knows about the Islamic invaders, and we get that every day. But no one takes in something which is arguably more important, which is the Mongols. And the Mongols, who are ignored in popular history, in WhatsApp forwards, arguably are more important. Because what happens with the Mongols is threefold. First of all, they create a hostile border between the Khaljis who run Delhi and Central Asia. So suddenly all those northern trade routes which have led to China are cut. And this is the end of the Golden Road. There is no more trade. India is locked in by the Mongols. Secondly, the Mongols finally create the Silk Road, which did not exist earlier, but which now does, because the Mongols control the entire overland route between the South China Sea and the Mediterranean. So it's under the Mongols that Marco Polo in 1271 travels from Jerusalem to Xanadu along the newly minted Silk Road, which did not exist before. And thirdly, the Mongols drive highly educated Persian-speaking refugees down into Delhi. So when you go to House Caste today in Delhi, that's the madrasa built by the refugee Persian-speaking intellectuals. And this is the period that India becomes Persian-speaking. And Persian spreads right down here to Madurai by the 13th century. And you have Persianate-speaking courts by the 13th century. So you can make a good case that the Mongols, the Islamic invasions are very important, there's no question, there's enormous destruction. But you can make a good case that the Mongols are the forgotten crucial operator in Indian history, who we don't acknowledge and who we don't send WhatsApp forwards to every day from our nephews and granduncles. So.
I want to, in this fascinating sort of movement of history, people, ideas, I want to end on a light note. Again, a wonderful discovery from Willy's book, that the Mongol invader, Genghis Khan, came almost to the border of India and turned back, thankfully, otherwise we'd be hating different kinds of people, because he saw a rhino, and that scared the daylights out of him, So India was saved by a rhino from the Mongol invasion.
Little known fact, that it's the rhino that saved you guys, because Genghis, for some reason, has the shit scared out of him by the rhino, and he then goes off and burns Poland instead. So
But one more thought, I think, which again would tie the whole evening in, is that, this diffusion of ideas was without the sword. And I had asked Willy this the last time we spoke, that Alexander, when he was coming, and he's called the Great Alexander always, but he burnt Persepolis, and he burnt the entire Iranian civilization. Genghis was burning stuff. So that whole period, we speak of Alexander as the Great Alexander. We speak of Khilji and others legitimately as marauders and people who destroyed to build whatever they built. So in that, the real point of pride really is that for 1500 years, ideas could be transmitted without a sword. I think is something that we should really build into our national identity as a point of pride. Except the Cholas.
Yes and no, because here, of all places, we have to, again, if we're being honest,
the Cholas.
The Pallavas and the Cholas.
Yes.
The Pallavas burn every temple.
The Cholas burned the Sri Lanka.
And the Cholas together both burn Sri Lanka. So it's not like everyone here is incredibly sort of charming, and I mean, you all are, but but it is the real world, and violence takes place, and war involves massive casualties here as elsewhere. And
of course, Ashoka also, but I was talking about as transmission of ideas.
I mean, the great cataclysmic battle in this part of the world, which is not really part of the school text, is the Pallavas against the Chalukyas. And the Chalukyas write these texts saying that the Pallavas and the Cholas rape Brahmin women, level temples. So there's these kind of massive, so it isn't like we're living in Eden before all this. The normal rules of war and suffering and human conflict exist here throughout history. But what is true is that Indian ideas spread through Southeast Asia. Go back to that extraordinary map at the beginning.
He's going to stop writing and become a teacher. We can just see this happening now. He loves this.
I love my slides, yeah. But this extraordinary map is something to take home with you tonight, because this is genuinely the story of how Indian soft power, without a single shot being fired, spreads throughout this region. And although there is violence internally in Indian kingdoms, and although there are Chola raids to the Malacca Straits, the ideas of India are not passed through violence. The ideas of India are passed through their sophistication.
Yeah.
And that's rare. You know, most empires in history exist and spread their ideas through violence. But genuinely, you can say without any spin or caveat, that Buddhism and Hinduism and mathematics from this country all pass in all directions through the power of their sophistication. The only parallel in my part of the world is when you go to Edinburgh today and you go down Princes Street, you see a little Parthenon where the National Gallery is. Now that's not because Agamemnon in the 5th century BC conquered Scotland. It's because the 18th century Scots were so impressed by the sophistication of the thought of ancient Greece that they rebuilt it in Edinburgh in the 18th century. And that's what's happening in Khmer Cambodia, what's happening in all around these areas. They're taking on Indian ideas not because they have to, not because your ancestors conquered them, but because the ideas were so sophisticated and so extraordinary and so attractive. And that's how they spread.
Thank you.
Empire of the Spirit.
Thank you very much, Willie. Thank you, everybody. This has been absolutely riveting. And look forward to seeing you. Have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you so much. Willie will be signing books outside, so there's a desk outside, and if any of you are buying his books, which I think you should, he'll be signing it outside.